My name is Hanna Gerdes. I'm a Swedish human rights lawyer, and today I've been given the task to moderate this important conference. And now it has become high time for today's first session that will focus on approaches and challenges on how to collect and analyze equality data. How much discrimination is there? Is a question often asked to and by equality bodies and other actors. Can this question be answered by equality data? This session will shine light on the challenges present in the work to gather, compile and use equality data. And it will have 3 examples as a starting point for the discussion. And this session will be moderated by Michaela Moa, the EU Anti-Racism Coordinator. So I'm very happy to have you with us today, Michaela. Please come up. And I just want to say that during this session, you can write down your questions to the speakers, because there will be several speakers, and we will be collecting your questions during the whole session that is about for an hour. And then in the end, there will be a panel, and we will try to catch as many of your questions as possible. But before I hand over for you to introduce the other speakers, Michaela, I actually have to ask you a couple of things. Because you are the first EU anti-racism coordinator, the first ever in the European Union, right?
Very, very true.
It seems like quite a big and difficult task to coordinate such an important work for the whole Union. Can you say something about your mandate and about your work?
Absolutely. So, yes, indeed. Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here. My appointment, not so recent anymore, as the EU Anti-Racism Coordinator, really came about after the 2020 events with the Black Lives Matter movement becoming a global human rights movement, also landing in Europe, which pushed the Commission to then draft and adopt an EU anti-racism action plan. So my appointment was actually one of the deliverables or actions of the action plan itself. And my role indeed is to ensure the successful implementation of the action plan, which includes some 80 different actions to span over the course of 5 years. These actions consist of both legislative initiatives as well as policy actions, but focusing specifically on structural discrimination and racism. In addition, I aim to, together with an internal structure, the Task Force on Equality, to ensure that anti-racism is mainstreamed into the EU policy areas. And this also, of course, cannot be done alone, so I work very closely with different relevant stakeholders, from member states to equality bodies and civil society organizations. To really strengthen the policy actions on anti-racism across EU. So that's it in a nutshell. But
in a nutshell, what you're doing.
Indeed.
Not such a small nutshell, though. I mean, 80 actions, and I can imagine an action is not just like me now coming up on stage. It's probably quite big action. So I want to ask you about that. How do you find the energy, I mean, in these times?
Yeah, I think, non-discrimination and anti-racism, fundamental rights, is something that we need to be very cognizant of at all times, but especially in these times where they seem to be, in a sense, taking some steps backward. What really motivates me is to feel like I am, in some small part at least, ensuring that we truly move towards an EU, a more diverse and equal EU for everybody. But also, I think, indeed, ensuring that you have strong networks that you're working with, really doing this together as we are here doing today, is very much at the center.
Do you face resistance?
Yes, I do face resistance in the sense that I think, coming back to what I just mentioned, in these times, fundamental rights are, I think, they're in danger, in the sense that whenever change is about to happen, the resistance is also stronger, and I feel strongly that this is one of those moments, and especially in these moments, we need to be extremely vigilant.
So one source of energy then can be perhaps conferences like this, where we might have different perspectives and opinions, but at least hopefully we are amongst people that have the same fundamental ideas of where we're going.
Absolutely.
I'm handing over to you now.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you. Thank you again for having me here. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you to the Swedish Equality Ombudsman for organizing today's important event on equality data. Data collected by the European Union Agency on Fundamental Rights shows that many people in the EU still experience structural discrimination and racism, inequality and social exclusion on a regular basis. And this discrimination can, of course, be based on different grounds, including disability, sex, age, gender identity, ethnic origin, race, religion, belief, etc., or even a combination of these. Intersectionality, the intersectional approach has also been mentioned a few times here today. From the Commission's perspective, we are truly fully committed to stepping up the collection of equality data. And as mentioned very well by Lars earlier in his opening words, equality data can really be defined as any piece of information that's useful for the purposes of describing and analyzing the state of equality. And it can consist of, for instance, population censuses or surveys, complaints data, also discrimination testing, as well as qualitative research strategies such as case studies. So these are just a few examples of what equality data can be. The need for this type of reliable and comparable data is absolutely necessary for advancing the state of equality. And at the Commission, with this Commission, there's a strong commitment to equality in general. As mentioned also by Commissioner Dalli, we have quite a few strategies advancing equality. For instance, the Anti-Racism Action Plan, which is relates strongly to my mandate, but also the Gender Equality Strategy. We have an LGBTIQ equality strategy, strategy for persons of disabilities, but also the EU Roma inclusion strategy, as well as a strategy to combat anti-Semitism in Jewish life. And in all of these action plans and strategies, the necessity for reliable equality data is seen as very important. And we're not collecting data just for the sake of collecting data, of course, but to really enable policymakers and legislators and the public to assess the nature of discrimination suffered by vulnerable and marginalized groups and communities. It really allows, the aim is to ensure that policymakers can better design, adapt, monitor, and evaluate policies. Therefore, it really can be a powerful tool in the fight against racism and exclusion. Furthermore, breaking down data, so desegregating data, can really help in making the cumulative effects of structural racism, structural discrimination, inequalities, and discriminatory practices visible, because we know that this is exactly what weakens equality of opportunity and leads to poorer outcomes for certain people and groups. Here, the Commission really encourages member states to move towards a harmonized approach in equality data collection, but there's still a long way to go. And we lack a standard and common methodology, and some member states collecting this kind of data is seen as something that needs to be avoided. And in some member states, a bit more forward-thinking work is being done. And this also varies, as we know, with grounds, with what grounds we're talking about. For instance, with racial and ethnic origin, this is something that is seen as particularly challenging. But what this will mean that we can't compare the data over time or across countries to really measure the impact of our policies, of our legislation. And as mentioned also today, we're aware that the collection of some categories of data carries a terrible past, and it has at times been instrumentalized and used to persecute rather than to empower the most vulnerable in our society. And that's why this discussion that we're having here today, for instance, is very important. We really do need a harmonized approach on equality data collection that's grounded in the humanitarian ethical principle of do no harm. And to do so, it has to be done again together with member states, with academics, with equality bodies, EU institutions, and international organizations. But above all, we must respect and work with, not for, listen to those affected, and listen to those affected by discrimination. Equality bodies also can play a very important role in this work. This has also been recognized in the recent Commission proposal to strengthen standards for equality bodies, relating to their independence, their resources and powers to really help to combat discrimination in Europe more effectively. The current equality directives only provide that equality bodies must have the competence to conduct independent surveys concerning discrimination and to publish independent reports. But the recent proposals cover data protection and access to equality data and would require member states to ensure that in addition to conducting independent surveys concerning discrimination, equality bodies could also collect data on their activities, desegregated by grounds and fields. They would require to access that equality bodies have access to statistics collected by others, and also would be allowed to make recommendations on data to be collected and to play a coordination role in the collection of equality data. So keeping these few things I mentioned in mind, that there are indeed challenges and opportunities in the collection of equality data, I'd like to invite to the stage with me shortly one of our first speakers. Today we will indeed hear from three different examples from Sweden, from Germany, and from Ireland, and we'll hope to shed through these examples, these case examples, some light on some of the challenges present in this work when we gather, compile, and use equality data. So first I'd like to ask Love Ander, who's working as an analyst at the Swedish Equality Ombudsman and has also been the project manager for the Swedish Equality Ombudsman's first annual report on the state of discrimination in Sweden, and we will finally hear now the results of the report. So Love, welcome. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Michaela. Yes, I'm going to present the results from our first annual report about the state of discrimination in Sweden, which Lars mentioned earlier. And I can also tell all of you that the report is available in Swedish and in English outside of this room. I will show some PowerPoint slides during my presentation, but on these slides there will only be keywords, so even if you don't see the slides, you will not miss out on any information. The purpose of the reporting is to make the occurrence of discrimination visible. To do this, we present data both on the scale of discrimination and on the nature of discrimination. In other words, we try to describe how widespread discrimination is in society and also in what ways people get discriminated against. The nature of discrimination, I must say, is a very complex thing with many variations in different situations. So this is our first attempt of describing the current state of discrimination, but we need to continue to develop our approach and our methodology. Each report will contain an overall chapter on how widespread discrimination is in society. In this report, we will gather quantitative data that make it possible to monitor if the number of people experiencing discrimination is increasing or decreasing over time. At least that's our aim. In each annual report, we will also have about 3 thematic chapters where we describe the nature of discrimination on different themes. These chapters are primarily based on qualitative data. In this first report, the thematic chapters are about discrimination against children with neuropsychiatric disorders in schools, discrimination related to religion or other belief in working life, and discrimination related to multiple grounds. The themes will vary from report to report, and over time, we hope that the annual report will provide a better understanding of how discrimination can manifest itself. The report relies on many different data sources, such as complaints of discrimination, survey data, scientific research, interview studies, legal investigations, and court judgment. The report describes the experiences of discrimination, and discrimination from the perspective of the individuals who have been subjected to it. And based on these different kinds of data, we make 3 main conclusions, which also summarize the results. The first conclusion is that discrimination is a widespread and complex societal problem in Sweden. Last year, the Equality Ombudsman received about 3,600 complaints about discrimination. But results from surveys conducted by other governmental agencies indicate that these complaints are just the tip of an iceberg. In one survey, 7% of the population states to have been discriminated against during the last 3 months. And if you calculate the number of individuals affected based on that result, it will be around 600,000 people who has experienced discrimination just the last 3 months. And we also know from complaints about discrimination, dialogue with civil society, and interviews that discrimination occurs in many areas of society. Even though discrimination occurs in many areas of society, our second conclusion is that there are major risks for discrimination in the areas of working life and education. It should be noticed that one reason why we are able to identify particularly high risk in just working life and schools is that we have more data available about these 2 areas of society than others. So in working life, we identify that people get discriminated against in their workplaces, for example, in the form of harassment or sexual harassment. But we also see that people are discriminated against in recruitment situations. Scientific research shows that people with Muslim and Arab names are less likely to be invited to job interviews, even if they have equal or more merits than other candidates for the same job. When it comes to discrimination in education, the report demonstrates that children are harassed in schools, either by other pupils or by teachers. Our data especially shows that there are problems with harassments related to ethnicity, religion, or disability. Another problem is that many children with neuropsychiatric disorders do not get the support and adaptations that they need to reach the school's learning objectives. According to the Swedish Discrimination Act, this might be discrimination in the form of inadequate accessibility. The third and final conclusion is that some individuals are more at risk of being discriminated against than others. Although every individual might be discriminated against in different situations and under different circumstances, there are some individuals and groups of individuals that are more at risk of being discriminated against. In surveys, we see a general pattern that more women than men state to have been discriminated against. And we also see that people under the age of 30, to a greater extent, state that they have been discriminated against compared to people over 30. As I have already described, people with Muslim or Arab names are discriminated against in recruitment situations, and there are certain risks for children with neuropsychiatric disorders to be discriminated against in schools. We also see that people who, based on their appearance, can be presumed to belong to a certain ethnicity or religion, are subjected to harassment and discrimination in various contexts. An example of this is Muslim women who wears a veil. I'm going to end this presentation by saying something about how the report relates to equality data. In the report, we present data on how many people that state that they are subjected to discrimination, and data about how and under which circumstances people are subjected to discrimination. We also describe that some groups of individuals are more at risk of being subjected to discrimination than others. This type of data that focus on the incident of discrimination rather than structural inequalities is a type of equality data that is useful for combating discrimination and which can also bring clarity to the causes behind some of the inequalities that we see in our societies. From our work with the annual report, we have learned that there is a need for both quantitative and qualitative data. The different types of data addresses discrimination from different perspectives, and together they give a more comprehensive and useful information about discrimination. We have also learned that there is still need for more data. We see the need for more data about in which situations that people are discriminated against. And we also see that there is a need for more data which make it possible to analyze discrimination against specific groups of individuals. At the same time, as earlier speaker also has said, it's important that equality data is not misused. For example, by being used in a way that could potentially lead to discrimination, reinforce stereotypes, or increase polarization in society. We should be aware of that equality data might also be used as an argument that a specific group or minority are a burden for the society, by some people at least. It is also important that the collection of equality data is done in a way that gives due regard to the individuals concerned, and that the general data protection regulation is taken into account. There needs to be a clear purpose for what the data will be used for, and this purpose must be anchored in the groups of individuals who are most affected. Self-identification, voluntariness, and anonymity are important principles that should be applied as far as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Loe, for this very interesting presentation. I wanted to ask you what in your work how do you think what are the biggest challenges, in a sense, in the work going forward?
Yes, as I said, I think we have a challenge when it comes to the data available. We need more data about discriminations in other areas of society than the working life and education, and that is also our ambition for coming reports to collect and develop such data. So that's a challenge. And as I said, we also need to find a way to collect and present data about discrimination against specific groups of individuals and specific situations. And we need to find a way to do this without reinforcing stereotypes or increasing polarization.
Thank you very much, Love.
Thank you.
Thank you again. And next, we will move on to our next presenter. So I'd like to present to you Natalie Szelenska, who's from the head of unit for research and general affairs at the Federal Anti-Discrimination Agency, to talk to us about discrimination experiences and hard-to-reach groups. The floor is yours, Natalie.
Thank you. Okay, I have to stand here so I can see the monitor. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really, really happy to be here today and speak on this very, very important topic, which is we're working for many, many years on equality data, and also our new independent Federal Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, Ferda Ataman, she's also very interested in this topic, so great that you choose this topic for this conference. So before I speak on a project we did some years ago, which is called Experiences of Discrimination in Germany, I will tell you a little bit about the current situation on equality data in Germany. I think this is not so different maybe from other member states. In Germany currently, there is not so much interest when it comes to state institutions in equality data. So we have no coordinated approach for collecting equality data. We have no national strategy on equality data. Oh, maybe now you can hear me. That's good. Okay, so anyway, now we come to the important part. As I said, we have no much interest in equality data from the German state. There is a lack of a coordinated approach, and also civil society organizations and research are asking for more equality data. We still can see that we have data on certain grounds. We have data on gender, we have data on age, we have data on disability to some extent, but of course we miss data. We miss data, especially when it comes to gender identity. We miss data when it comes to race and ethnicity. And of course, we miss data when it comes to religion. So we have a problem, especially when we speak about ethnicity data. We use proxies in Germany. We use the migration background, but this is a category which is not really helpful when it comes to showing racism. And of course, we have a big lack on data in service provision. So duty barriers do not collect really data on the different groups they provide services for, like for example, a hospital. And we have a lack of data of diversity in institutions. So I could not tell you how many teachers with different ethnicities are working in schools today. On the other hand, if we look on discrimination data, we can see some progress, and that is very good. We have now a very big panel, which is called the Socioeconomic Panel, for the first time, where you ask about 30,000 people in Germany, and for the first time we have an item on discrimination experiences in this survey, and the results will be published in 2024. So we're very excited to see what is coming on. We have, I think, similar to the Swedish Ombudsman, good complaints data. We looking for many years at our own complaints data. I think this year we have about 8,000 complaints at FADA, and there are many other anti-discrimination offices which also collect complaints, so we have good data on this. And I think what is also a progress is that we have more monitoring. So we have civil society organizations that really look at different grounds of discrimination. They collect reports on, for example, anti-Semitism. So they collect reports on Muslim hatred. So this is really progressing. So this is very good. So you could see for equality data, not so positive. For data on discrimination, we make some progress. So wrong direction. So now I want to show you a little bit present you a little bit our study on discrimination in Germany. It's a study we commissioned in 2014. It's a little bit old, but I think it's still interesting. The main idea of the research was really to show discrimination in a comprehensive way and make it visible. We wanted to show multiple forms of discrimination, and we wanted to really to reach groups which usually not so easily are covered in research. For example, groups maybe elderly people, maybe people from different ethnic groups, and that was one of the main goals of the survey. And last but not least, which is an important topic anyway, we wanted to give recommendations based on the survey to the general public on discrimination. The guiding questions, very easy, I think not so astonishing. We wanted to know how many people in Germany have experienced discrimination, on what characteristics, in which fields, for example in education, in work, how often they experience it, and we wanted also to know how people react if they experience discrimination, what do they do, and what effects does it have on them. In order to do this, we have not done only one survey, but 2 surveys. And the new approach was really to do a survey where people themselves could report discrimination experiences. We asked them for discrimination experiences in the last 24 months, and we got around 18,000 people who answered the survey, and of these 18,000 people, 15,000 had experienced discrimination. So we had a really, really, really large sample, but of course, and that's the problem, the survey was not representative. So we asked civil society organizations, can you please ask people to take part in the surveys, and so we got this. And in order to have another basis as well, we did at the same time a representative survey asking similar questions, not so many questions, and here we could see also certain results. And as I told you before, one of the main goals of the research was really to reach groups which we usually don't have so much knowledge about. So what we did the questionnaire not only in German, but also in English, in French, in Spanish, in Turkish, in Polish, in Russian. We had the questionnaire in easy language. The questionnaire, if you went to the questionnaire, it could be read to you. So even with people for seeing impairments, the questionnaire was helpful. And then that was the first time we had special interviewers trained to go to special communities. So we had one interviewers who went to people with learning and cognitive and physical disabilities. We had interviewers who went to refugee homes and interviewed refugees and asylum seekers. We had people who went to elderly people and interviewers for Roma and Sinti, and the last one was for people with low social status, small income. Also, we had interviewers. So, in order to try, at least, it was a trial, I must say, to cover this groups as well. And I think here I can say similarly to my speaker before. What was very important for us is that the questionnaire was developed together with communities. So they could look at the question and say, okay, here we need a different question. We informed them on the survey. We showed them the results before we published the results. We discussed them with them. Of course, the approach was voluntary, anonymity, transparency. So you could decide what you answer and what you don't answer. And of course, what we also did for the first time, I think it was one of the first surveys in Germany, that we asked the people to self-identify on their race or on their groups they belong to, and of course also we asked the people, who do others identify you? So we could match this, and that was a very, very interesting approach where we learned a lot. I give you very, very shortly 2 results of the 2 surveys we did. When you look at the representative survey, we found that nearly 30% of all people who responded had experienced discrimination in Germany on the different grounds. Age was most prominent. But what we not could do with this representative survey is to show really how the different grounds intersect. So we could not really show anything on multiple discrimination. And here, of course, the other survey showed clearly that multiple discrimination is very important, and we could see that, for example, gender and age, so age discrimination and discrimination on gender, often intersects, and 50% of the people who answered the big survey showed that there is an intersection between age and gender. So here you can see the differences if you do a representative survey or a survey like the other one. From the big survey, we could show not only in which fields people experience discrimination, but we could also show which groups experience more discrimination in certain fields. So if you look at the bottom row, you can see, for example, that in general, 11% of all people participating in the survey experience discrimination by state institution. But when you then go to racism, you see that the level of racism or racist discrimination experienced by people in the survey is higher when it comes to this area. Or for example, for persons with disability, of course, the health sector is one of the most important sectors when it comes to discrimination. And this we could show very nicely through this survey. And I think it helped us also really to see the stories of the individual people and to gather information on it. So what it shows, you need different instruments, but even having done this survey, and as I said before, we still, I think, at the beginning of data collection, especially when it comes to equality data. So what it really needs, I think, is a political will by member states to collect data. We need a legal basis, and maybe here the European movements or legislation will help us. We need, at least in Germany, a stronger focus on diversity monitoring and data on service provision. I think here other member states are much better equipped than Germany. And I think this is clear from all the speeches, we need a constant dialogue with the communities on how to safeguard data, how to develop certain categories. And if you don't do this discourse, we will not come forward, like especially in countries like Germany. We have a strong resistance by Roma and Sinti groups to collect certain data. And this is it's very, very understandable why they are afraid of data collection. And I think we need really an equality data strategy to come forward. And what is the chance, I think, really on the European level, and speaking here also for all the people who work with equality bodies, is maybe that we focus even stronger on complaints data. Maybe we can bring complaints data on the European level together. I think this would be a very strong message, as we could show all equality bodies have so many complaints in 1 year. I think this might be a way forward, and here I stop.
Thank you very much, Natalie. So you've tried to indeed collect data regarding discrimination of groups that otherwise often don't participate in such surveys due to often historical reasons or lack of trust even. So the data that you were able to compile was not representative, so it can't give us necessarily the general answers about the state of play. Do you still think that it's worth conducting this type of a survey?
Yes, I think it's worthwhile because you get a new picture. You can still reach groups which you never could really, or never, maybe yes, but only with very complicated approaches in a representative service. And of course, we cannot make it so easily representative for certain groups because we lack the equality data. And I think for this kind of approach, you can really get very deep insight in the discrimination experiences. So it's nearly like a big qualitative research, even if you have a quantitative approach. And we have now decided even to replicate the study because it was really helpful for us, and it helped us to work with the community a lot. So I think we will continue this way.
And it sounds also like part of the trust building exercise. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Before I ask the next speaker on stage, I'd just like to remind you that you can ask questions that we'll still have, you'll have an opportunity to, if you have any questions for the speakers, please write them down and provide them to the people you can see on the side raising their hands. So just keep that in mind, please. So I'd like to ask next, our next presenter from Ireland. Welcome on stage, Iris Elliott, who is the Head of Policy and Research at the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, to give us an Irish example. The floor is yours, Iris.
Thank you so much. I'm honoured to contribute to this important conference during the Swedish Presidency. My contribution is going to share our work in Ireland to develop a national data infrastructure. I'm going to comment on the roles that I would consider national equality and national human rights institutions can play in the work of equality data. And I'm going to share some of my reflections on our work around building the equality data community, strengthening the legislative framework, and also supporting practice. I'm going to outline the development of Ireland's National Equality Data Strategy. This is very much a work in progress, but last month we launched our public consultation on a draft equality data strategy. This is very new and box fresh. It's a great opportunity for me to share it and then get some feedback while the consultation is ongoing. My contribution is going to draw on 5 years working both nationally and regionally and leading the data work in the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, which we called IREC. So when you hear IREC, that's us, during my presentation. So to begin by describing our approach to equality data in Ireland, IREC recognises that equality data is a public good both nationally in Ireland and regionally in Europe. And so like all public goods, it's beyond the scope of any one organisation or part of society to develop and sustain. Only through our collective effort can this public good be achieved and deployed to both identify and prevent systemic discrimination, but also to advance equality. I would argue that equality data is a global public good. That is one whose benefits reach across borders, generations and population groups. I think that's why our European cooperation has been so important for member states and also European institutions. In Ireland, we focused on the macro task of developing the national data infrastructure, and that very much reflects my early learning from engagement with government departments and the central statistics offices, the importance of framing equality data not as a side agenda, but as an integral part of our national data work. At the same time, we have been engaged in very specific activities such as advising on legislation, policy, our census, which happens every 5 years, surveys and administrative data. I just wanted to speak about the roles of national equality bodies and national human rights institutions. IREC has a dual mandate in Ireland. We're also the EU National Rapporteur on Trafficking in Humans. We're the independent monitoring mechanism for the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We're the designated coordinating body for the National Preventative Mechanism under the Optional Protocol and the Convention Against Torture. And we also have a gender pay gap monitoring role. And all of those mandates require equality data. We have a line which is like, you cannot monitor what you cannot measure. So data is core to our entire mandate. So in summary, these are the activities that IREC has engaged. We've engaged in visioning, real-world planning, connecting, convening, capacity building, horizon scanning, and also stepping up as an honest broker. And that's what's kind of made sense for us in Ireland, that configuration of activities. We've very much taken the approach of articulating the bigger win, so visioning the society that we could create through equality data, but at the same time being very grounded in the real world, understanding the complexities of the endeavour and also identifying work of mutual interest that aligns with other colleagues' mandates, expertise, their existing work priorities and programmes. And I would consider we're very well placed to do horizon scanning as a national equality and national human rights institution. For example, engaging in the EU directives on standards for equality bodies, the EU Data Governance Act, the EU Data Act. And fundamentally, equality data represents such an opportunity to measure and monitor equality and discrimination that it's really critical for our kind of organisation to prioritise equality data in IREC's work. And it's also really critical that IREC sort of steps up into this honest broker role so that we try and engage with and broker other people's concerns and interests in order to progress this work. We thought it would be useful maybe to share what the different equality grounds in Ireland are, because we recognised in our regional discussions around equality data that obviously different member states cover different grounds in their equality legislation. This is our list. Just to say, the traveller community is our indigenous nomadic people, aligned to the experience of Roma. And we've been extremely lucky in the equality data work in Ireland that Pavy Point, as one of the national traveller and Roma organisations, has spent way over the last decade really advancing the equality agenda from a civil society perspective. And also it's useful to know that in Ireland we're in the process of reforming our equality legislation, and the Irish government's programme includes commitments to introduce gender identity and socioeconomic grounds as well. So this is a very light, this list hopefully will get longer. So in terms of our approach to equality data work, as I said, we build the equality data community, we strengthen the legislative framework, and we support practice. Building the equality data community has very much involved or required addressing assumptions, and that includes assumptions that data is only about statistics, which for any statisticians in the room, that really turns a lot of people off, that it's beyond people's skill set, that it's somebody else's job, and also that it's too expensive. Building the equality data community has also involved building alliances, and so for us, we have found equality data really is of critical importance and significant interest to a whole range of partners we have. The government, local and national, public bodies, research institutes, academics, civil society organisations, our parliament, legal practitioners, the courts and media. So this is not a side issue. This is core to what a lot of parts of Irish society are engaged with. And so our approach has been very much to identify, engage with, convene and give space to all these different stakeholders, and very consciously set a tone in our engagement which is about inclusive, collegial, respectful, supportive. Then to move on to strengthening the legislative framework. That has involved, I suppose, making best use of what we've already got. So in terms of legislative levers, that would be things like our Equality Acts. It's also the IREC Act, which established the Commission in 2014, because under the IREC Act we have what's called our Public Sector Equality and Human Rights Duty, which impacts all public bodies in Ireland, both in terms of the populations they engage with, people who use services, etc., but also employees. We also, in terms of the legislative framework, are looking at levers in international human rights and equality instruments coming from the EU, Council of Europe, United Nations as well. We've also been very active in engaging in negotiations and also the transposition of EU directives as well. And then we always include equality data in our legislative observations and our submissions on legislative reform. So even in the last couple of years, examples of legislation and development where we've requested mandatory equality data provisions have been around hate crime, hate speech, policing and family courts. And then also examples of submissions around legislative reform have been our equality legislation, but also civil legal aid, education of disabled people, healthcare, including termination of pregnancy. So while we're taking this more macro approach to building the infrastructure, every opportunity we have, we place equality data front and centre. And then in terms of supporting practice, we're now moving really to implementing our EU resources through events which are going to involve national and European experts, developing national guidance, code of practices and learning resources. We're also going to be assessing the needs and preferences through a survey with public bodies under the Public Sector Duty Network. And then we're also going to be contributing to and circulating compendia of practices. That seems to be the stage we're at now. So in terms of our equality data strategy, it's very much a work in progress. I'm sharing some of the timeline here. I think it's interesting where equality drivers come from. For us, it was the OECD Equality Budgeting Scan, which recommended an equality data strategy for Ireland in 2019. We had a equality data audit using the European tool in 2020 that was conducted by our Central Statistics Office. And then in 2022, we set up an equality data strategy working group, co-chaired by the Central Statistics Office and the Government Department for Equality. And I think that's been a kind of an interesting structure and approach to take, the co-chairing. And then in terms of the membership, we've had quite data-heavy departments such as social welfare, education at the table. We've also had public bodies like our Health Research Board, our National Disability Authority, research institutes, civil society organisations. So Pavy Point, the Traveller and Roma Centre is part of the working group, and also our National Women's Council. And now we're in the public consultation phase. So the draft strategy is available online at the moment as part of the public consultation that was launched last week. The goal of the National Equality Data Strategy is to improve the collection, disaggregation and use of equality data. So that will probably find familiar for anybody who is involved in anything to do with the EU resources. We've pretty much lifted a lot of the content. It's a 5-year strategy. It has 4 strands looking at collection, standards and classification, use and monitoring and oversight. And there's only 13 actions, although the actions include things like create an equality data hub. So they're not small, but we wanted something that was quite lean, focused, feasible, actionable and impactful. So that's kind of the approach. We haven't done tens and tens and tens of actions, which we do on other strategies. I think we're learning our lesson on that one. And then in terms of the content, we define equality data and we outline its importance, drawing on the EU guidance. We make a commitment to a cross-departmental strategy. We connect it to national frameworks and EU activity. And the national frameworks are our equality legislation, our duty, our national equality strategies, our national data strategies, and also the EU equality data collection. We address GDPR, which is an ongoing issue in Ireland. We've done a lot of work in that area. And it also looks at ethical issues as well and some actions under that. And it also provides case studies to illustrate what we're talking about when we talk about equality data. So thank you so much, Gura Mahakut, and I look forward to contributing to the panel now. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
There we go. You can hear me now. Perfect. So thank you so much, Iris. Very interesting and the first of its kind on the EU level, an equality data strategy, a national equality data strategy. Very much looking forward digging into it. So what are some of the benefits and limits with discrimination data, would you say? So we know we've discussed today that both discrimination and equality data have, in a sense, opportunities and challenges, but what's your viewpoint on this?
I think it's that we need both. I think the equality data conversations we have scope it more widely in terms of, and also I think it kind of engages this visioning in terms of creation of an equality-based society. I think that engages colleagues, and I think it reaches further if we look at disaggregated data through that lens. I think it's also very important to think about discrimination data. What we found in Ireland was we commissioned research, so very interesting to hear about the approach in Sweden. We've got a similar approach, different surveys, studies, secondary data analysis, and while those reports were very useful, a lot of it just talked to the gaps in it. So I think you nearly need to do both. also, I think, for me, why we took this macro approach, because we felt that we were juggling so many moving parts that at least the equality data strategy would put a framework around it while we were trying to strengthen our discrimination data and our equality data.
Thank you, Iris. Don't go anywhere. Stay on stage with me, and I'd like to ask the other speakers also for a few brief questions before we go into questions from the audience.
I'll come over here.
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned earlier in my first part, the intervention about EU's role in also the work that the EU is doing on equality data through the subgroup and the different policy tools. From your point of view, how could equality data be harmonized on the EU level, and also what could be the role further to what the EU is currently doing in supporting in the collection and use of equality data? Who would like to start? Natalie.
I start. Yeah, I think that the most important thing is really setting standards. So standards, how we can collect equality data and giving guidance and giving good practice. And I think here really the subgroup on equality data is very important. And but what I want to say, the European level is also important really to making member states aware of the importance, because if you have good guidance on the European level, but it's not followed by the member states, well.
Thank you. Love?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important to have knowledge at the European level, and that it will also gain the national level. But I also think we have to be, it's sometimes difficult to harmonize. There has to be a flexibility for different countries' traditions and the contexts. And also I think it's sometimes hard to interpret, especially statistics. So maybe differences between different countries should not always be analyzed as, for example, differences in equality in those countries. It could also have other reasons. Just important to keep that in mind, I think.
Yes, definitely. I think what you mentioned just now is relevant indeed. Understanding also the country context, historical specificities with different groups, etc. Iris, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think the EU Equality Data Subgroup, I mean, I suppose I would say this is a member. I think it's been incredibly successful in terms of just creating a collegial peer group. So this is something that every member state individually has to tackle, and I think that we would have harmonisation can come through that kind of collegial collective effort. I think that's really important. I think also the role of European institutions. So obviously we've benefited hugely from the work the Fundamental Rights Agency has done chairing the EU Equality Data Subgroup, but also I think other institutions like IGE, etc. I think also completely taken on board what you're saying about respecting different member states' traditions, etc. That, you know, looking at where the EU can create some form of basis for harmonisation, through things like EU directives, creating some legislative standards, but also one of the things we're exploring in Ireland is around the EU Data Governance Act and the EU Data Act, where I understand the EU will be investing in member states developing data hubs. So that piece again about sort of some standards around this is what we would be looking for from those data hubs, and whether or not equality is a horizontal principle or it's something that, you know, it asks member states to create an equality data hub in each area. I think the other thing that sort of strikes me is we have our own world, which is our equality data world, and then I sit down with my colleagues in the Central Statistics Office and they have their statistics world. And I think that piece about even trying to harmonise the different efforts of different groups of colleagues at a European level, I think would also be very helpful.
Thank you. I think something that's been mentioned today quite a few times already is indeed the importance of ensuring that data, equality data specifically, is not used for harm, and that fundamental rights are taken into account, but specifically data protection legislation. What are the important factors, others that have been mentioned already today, that need to be taken into account for protecting vulnerable and marginalized communities that are experiencing racism and discrimination?
I mean, one thing that sort of strikes me is we have in different member states a lot of very good experience of working directly with different civil society organisations and population groups. So I think even just some sharing of what that expertise has been. One of the things, as I've referred to in Ireland, has been really critical, has been the leadership by, say, the traveller community with the Roma community over a long period of time in terms of just very, very honestly exploring the challenges around it, building trust, building in safeguards, looking at data protection issues, etc. But actually, one of the things that strikes me is the traveller community is one of the strongest advocates for equality data and very much engaged with, say, for example, the Roma community, but is a real leading light in terms of, you know, talking to the LGBT community who have also experienced such oppression and discrimination in our member state. So I think there's a piece there about the expertise and the role over time of civil society organisations for us to, in the equality body, to learn from them, but also to give them their place in terms of leadership, because I think that's our experience, is that the leadership needs to be there from civil society organisations.
Natalie, you had something
Yeah,
to add?
I think it's not only expertise, but it's also important, I think, making communities as data owners. Because sometimes we have the idea that the state is collecting the data or the statistical office or whoever, but I think what is important to see the community themselves as data owners and make them resource them, give them the expertise. Like in Germany, we had this big project Afro Census, where the data on the African community is held by the communities themselves. And of course, there's much more trust then in this issue, and you can have very, very different results.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Then I'd like to ask actually Hannah to join us on stage. You had mentioned that there's quite a few questions from the audience.
A lot of questions, and we have some time. So I tried to sort of sort them. So I will start with two questions actually to you, Natalie. They are directly to you. So I will. The first question is, what is the approach of Germany on data regarding anti-Gypsyism, discrimination against Sinti and Roma? And this is a question from Javier that comes from the Fundación Secretariado Gitano in España.
Yeah, okay. I think we still don't have a approach on it. I think with the European Roma strategy, we have now the mandate to start a dialogue with Sinti and Roma groups on how to monitor discrimination, and we are really at the beginning on this dialogue. As you know, the Roma community in Germany does not participate in the FRA studies on anti-Gypsyism, and so we want really to start the dialogue, but I think it will be a very long process, and I don't know how it will end.
And so there is another question for you. You showed on one of your first slides that you have statistics on gender, age, and disabilities. How is the statistics on disabilities collected by the Bureau of Statistics? And do you not have statistics on ethnicity and foreign background, like, for example, in Sweden? That's a question.
Okay, with disability, it's a difficult issue as well. I mean, we have data on the official status of having a disability, which is collected by the statistical office, but we don't have good data on the different forms of disability. So, and especially if disability is not medical recognized, we also don't have data. So I think it's really not clear. I mean, we have some data on disability, but not all. So I think it's too complicated to explain it all. And when it comes to ethnicity, as I said before, here we are stuck in this whole discussion on the so-called migration background, which really shows the first generation, the second generation, but does not go beyond any further. And this discussion is going on and not really coming forward. And I think this is similar than in Sweden.
Yeah, I'd like to just respond indeed to the challenge of proxies, of using proxies that are not necessarily always effective. Using, for instance, my daughter's case, coming from a country where the proxy is a parent's birth country and a mother tongue. So her mother's mother tongue is Finnish and her mother's birth country is Finnish. So if you're looking for discrimination information. In my daughter's case, her brownness is invisibilized. So this is the challenge that is with proxies if they're not effective. And I think here especially you definitely need to work with the communities on how should they be, how would they like to be identified, or what is the terminology to be used to ensure that this invisibilization, for instance, doesn't happen when it comes to third generation.
So, and then we have some questions for you, Love. Why is there no information about the discrimination of Samis in the report published yesterday?
Because we don't, like this, in the quantitative part, we rely on statistics of complaints to the Equality Ombudsman and on results from different surveys available. And to the statistics, we don't have data disaggregated for the Sami population. For the part where you have 3 thematic chapters, which give more detailed information, this time we chose not to have a chapter about the discrimination of the Sami population. Maybe in our report in the future we will do that. And that goes for many other discrimination of many other groups as well. So our view is that we can't give a good and detailed description of discrimination in all of society in every report, so we choose to make some thematic chapters where we can get a better picture.
Okay, then we have a question from Jacob, that's from Ombudsman in Czech Republic. How do you assess the number of complaints and judgments in relation to the level of discrimination? Low numbers might indicate a low level of discrimination as well as a low public awareness on how to defend against discrimination. So how do you assess this?
You mean the difference between the results from surveys and the number of complaints, right? That's your...
What says here is, how do you assess the number of complaints and judgments in relation to the level of discrimination?
Yeah, okay. That's how I get the question anyway. Yeah, I think it could be many reasons why people who experience discrimination do not file a complaint with an ombudsman. There could be knowledge. There is also the case of trust. Some people experience discrimination on nearly an everyday basis. Then maybe you don't have the energy to file a complaint every time. You also, of course, you need to feel that there is meaning in filing a complaint. Will it help me in my situation or will it not? In the case of being discriminated against, for example, as an employee by your employer, then you have also the power relation between the employer and the employee. It might be problems for an employee that files a complaint. We know that, so that might be some of the reasons.
Yeah, I think for this it's very important also in service to look at reasons for non-reporting, so that we get a better picture why people don't make a complaint.
We have another question here about complaints that perhaps Iris Michaela could answer. What role can complaints play in equality and anti-discrimination data, considering that complaint numbers are not statistically representative when compared to quantitative surveys? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think in terms of complaint data, it is both statistical and qualitative as well. I think also I'm interested in the approach Sweden has taken in terms of your discrimination report, that you use multiple sources of data. So it may actually be that there would be research around even like awareness of rights and how to vindicate those rights, but right through to attrition rates over the system. So we've already started to have this conversation. If we were doing a discrimination report in Ireland, like almost how would you construct it so you could capture that that piece, so that it's not. So complaints data isn't only understood as the number of complaints made or the number of complaints dealt with by the relevant institutions. It tells a wider story about discrimination in society. You know, I think there would be a risk in being quite reductionist in terms of trying to create a report that tells a story about equality and discrimination in a society. So I think that is, for all of us who are involved in creating the evidence base as well as the data, that's a conversation that needs to be had about how do we construct reports, because we are always kind of conscious not only about what we're trying to tell as the story around equality and human rights in Ireland, but how those reports are read and how they're interpreted and how they're used by different actors. So I think it is something actually even at that design stage that's really, really important.
Can I say something there as well? We actually use in the report complaints data mainly as a qualitative data source. We read complaints and analyze what the experiences of discrimination in the complaints. And for that, I think complaints are really useful.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the other thing for us in terms of our mandate, our legal department obviously deals with a range of different types of legal work. So I would say also maybe to have a look at not only complaints data, but things for us, like we have equality reviews, which is a particular mechanisms. We've own name proceedings. We've a whole range of different types of legal activity. So I think that would also maybe determine how we might do something like a discrimination report in Ireland. Yeah.
And then we have a question, I don't know if this is possible to answer like quickly, but what kind of data do you have in your countries that shows structural racism, structural discrimination, in order to recognize structural racism as the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan asks? And how do you do it with evidence? Big question.
Yeah.
Can I say something? Yep. I think it's a very, very good question indeed, because I think we've spoken a lot of individual discrimination, we're speaking a lot of equality data, but when it comes to structural discrimination, you need data on institutions, and you need data on how the institutions really work. And this is still, I think, there is a lack of data, and there's a lack of good approaches really to measure this. So I think we have to be careful to say if equality data and discrimination data as we use now is really the real approach for answering this question. I mean, service provision is a good thing, and but apart from this, I think we lack approaches to measuring structural racism, structural discrimination.
Yeah. I mean, I know when we were writing our submission to the government around the National Action Plan Against Racism, we've a whole very long section on equality data and evidence, as you can imagine. And I do think there's a kind of complexity there about thinking about lots of different types of data sources. I mean, because we have the public sector equality and human rights duty in Ireland, we made a very strong case that we wanted in every public body in Ireland covered by the duty that in their statement of strategy, in their annual report, they would have a sort of a discrete section which would be about structural discrimination, racism, what they were doing within their body, and requiring them to do that so that we could then use that as a data source, for example. So I think we have to kind of think maybe sort of strategically about how do you create data. Like you oblige public bodies to create data. We also, and I've spoken often about this, we have a massive problem with data within our policing force in Ireland. And so that's where I would go back to what I was saying about the legislative basis. So trying to change policing legislation so they're mandated to collect data and report data and make data publicly available, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's not a simple thing. I would say we would have a good sense maybe of where the gaps are, and also things like looking at hate crime, hate speech legislation, where we've proposed, say, for example, third-party reporting, that kind of thing. You know, so it's lots of different methodologies, lots of different data sources. We recently funded research, and I know that language isn't ideal, second generation ethnic minority young people, to get them to describe their experiences of racism and discrimination, and then use that qualitative research to try and inform us to think, well, what does that look in terms of legislation or data systems? Thank you.
So our time is running out. I'm very sorry, but I have to make sure that the people in here get some food as well. So thank you so much for attending.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.